Our esteemed Reverend Teijo Munnich, um, abbess and founder of Great Tree, will be giving us a talk this morning um, on Christmas Eve night. Teijo.
So I don't have, just a minute, Lorna asked me earlier this week or end of last week or something, who's giving the next talk. And I looked on my schedule and it was me. And, but I didn't have any title for it. So I said, well, I guess I'll just show up, and if anybody comes, we can have a conversation. But then I got this book in the mail. It's called Golden: The Power of Silence in a World of Noise. And I had no idea where it had come from, and I just but I thought I better start reading it in case somebody asked me if I'd gotten it. And so I read like the first couple pages, and as Lorna said, I got kind of inspired. And so I thought, well, that's an interesting thought, because it's about silence, And I thought, well, that's interesting, because Christmas Eve for me evokes a feeling of deep silence. And every time I think about Christmas Eve, I have this feeling, and I guess it probably comes from my childhood, but of course the idea Silent Night, Holy Night came up in my mind. And I thought, yeah, it is, silence is kind of sacred, it is kind of holy. But I thought Silent Night, Holy Night was too long of a title, so I just called it Silent Night. So I just want to read you this little exercise that I did, which is right at the beginning of the chapter. And have you experienced it? I had a very, very interesting experience. So it starts out with the question, and you can close your eyes if you want to, or whatever. What's the deepest silence you've ever known? So when you have something, why don't you raise your hand or whatever under reactions? Or give us a thumbs up or something. Question?
Like, oh, but shall we speak? Shall I speak?
Oh, let's not speak yet. Let's just finish this
Okay.
exercise. But I just wanted to make sure everyone had kind of gone to that place. So if you could indicate it.
Brooke joined after the question was asked. She might need to know what the question was.
Oh, I don't see Brooke. Just a second.
I see Brooke.
Hi, Brooke. So okay, let's go back to the question. When you're ready to move on, give me a little thumbs up. Do you know how to do that? Everybody know how to do that in the reactions? Okay, so here's the question. What is the deepest silence you've ever known? And it goes on to say you can trust the first memory that comes to you. No need to overthink it. Okay, well, the thumbs up thing isn't working very well, so I'm just gonna move on. As you remember the experience, see if you can settle into it. Recall where you are, what's happening around you, and who, if anyone, is present. Summon the atmosphere, the quality of light, the mood in the air, the feeling in your body. Is it quiet to the ears? Or is it the kind of silence that comes when no person or thing is laying claim to your attention? Is it quiet to your nerves? Or is it the kind of silence that lives deeper still, like when the turbulent waters of internal chatter suddenly part, revealing a clear path forward? I'm going to read that again. Is it quiet to the ears? Or is it the kind of silence that comes when no person or thing is laying claim to your attention? Is it quiet in your nerves? Or is it the kind of silence that lives deeper still, like when the turbulent waters of internal chatter suddenly part, revealing a clear path forward? Now take a moment to consider what might sound like a strange question. Is the silence simply the absence of noise, or is it also a presence unto itself? Is the silence simply the absence of noise, or is it also a presence unto itself? So that's what sparked the title for this talk, that little exercise. And because when I did it took me back to a place of silence. And at this point, if anyone wants to share anything, I know you started to, Pam, before, and if you want to share what came up for you, I welcome that, and I will also share.
Okay. What came to mind, and I trust that, as you said, was when my daughter died. And I'm told that I screamed, in fact. It wasn't silent. And I've not thought of it that way. And I don't remember screaming, but it was silent in that different way. You know, there was like no distraction. So I think, doesn't have to be quiet. Silence can be something else, I guess. So it was total presence, I guess. Um, so maybe that's what it is. So that's all.
Thank you. You don't have to share, but if anybody else wants to say something.
That silence is a silence I have no idea about, but I feel your silence at that time for some reason. My silence was the silence of a dark night with the snow coming down and a light nearby so that I could still see the snow. But I was in the dark and the snow and no sounds of traffic, nothing else. So silence wasn't really silent because I could hear the snow, but everything about me was silent. But I was wide awake. That was cool.
Oh, Brooke.
Good morning. I'm on my phone because I don't have internet at my house right now for some reason. So I'm having a little trouble navigating this interface. But the memory that came to me was being in Alaska and being on the saddle between two mountains, watching the sunrise hit Mount McKinley. And I mean, it was literally very quiet because there was nobody around and no, not much wildlife. So it was literally very, very silent, but my senses were alive and just the presence of the mountain and seeing it across the valley with this river and this sense of time and the stillness. It's just was one of the best moments of my life.
Thank you.
So yeah, I appreciate that, Teijo. What came up for me was it's happened twice when I've been out in the woods, on the Bartram Trail. There's one place, near the river. And I remember stopping there with, I was backpacking with my old retriever, Ben. And it's like, I'd stopped at a big tree and resting there. And all of a sudden the world went silent. It was more of a presence. When usually, the woods can be real quiet and all that sort of, but it actually went like dead quiet, like everything stopped. And, the stillness itself was noticeable. I've heard that same stillness before when I was camping. It was like everything just stopped. And you notice that there was no noise around. There was, the wind had stopped, all the animals had stopped, anything that, made any kind of noise had stopped. So it was very, very strange and memorable. So I appreciate that. Thanks.
What's striking me about all of these is, and this is, as those of you who've been listening to me recently, I know I'm really talking and thinking a lot about just that letting go that happens. And we don't exactly know how, but which, comes up very much through Zazen, and which is what is really bodhicitta, what brought us to this practice. And everything that everyone has said, it elicits that experience of letting go. And for me too, the first thing that came up for me when I read this, but more has come up, especially since I've been listening to everyone speaking. What came up for me was that moment when I felt a deep silence was at the end of 7-day sesshin in December. It was a Rohatsu sesshin, which it was the year after Kadiri Roshi died, and I was leading it. And at the last Rohatsu sesshin before he died, he had scheduled us to go through the morning of the 8th of December, which is Buddha's Enlightenment Day, or through that day. And then he decided on the second to the last day that we should all sit up all night, which is traditional to do the night before Buddha's Enlightenment. So, I really liked that, and I had done it a couple times in the monastery. And so when I was leading it, I decided we were going to do that again. And but the way that he set it up is that you could kind of come and go whenever you wanted to. And there were breaks every couple hours where they would serve tea and things. But that particular night was very agitated. And so everybody was getting up and leaving. And for most of the night, I was the only one in the room. And I could hardly sit still. It was just one of those times when I wanted to get up and just leave, but I was leading it. So I didn't feel like I should do that. and so I stayed on my cushion all night, and it was like riding a bucking bronco, About 6 o'clock in the morning, everyone starts showing up again. Everybody had gone downstairs and just gone to sleep. And I remember that morning when we ended the sesshin, or when maybe it was at dawn, I felt this deep silence. And I think, when you kind of struggle like that, and I, when Pam, when you said that, I thought about when my sister died, which I know is not the same as losing a daughter, but it was so sudden, kind of, you're forced to let go. I mean, there's nothing you can do except everything that's happening just goes away except for that, and talking about being in Alaska or being out in the woods, I've had that same kind of experience up in the mountains in Canada, that deep silence in nature that just, there's nothing to hold on to there. So it's sort of, silence is this place of letting go. And I've been thinking a lot about this time of year. I've always felt that Christmas was very well placed. And I'm sure that there was a reason why Christmas was placed where it was as a holiday, because at this time of year, just to be able to relax into it, to kind of hibernate into this solstice time, and for those of you that were there, I think last Saturday, on Zoom last Saturday, Paige was kind of leading us through this kind of into this very restful time, and so being with family, or just in my case, I'm just here and we have snow, and it's just wonderful. I said to my brother last night, oh, I hope it snows. I like snow on Christmas, and it looks like we're going to have snow here on Christmas, although it's very cold outside. I guess it's -4. Is that what you said, Laura? And they have very little heat over there. So, and does anybody else have anything they want to share about that? I also listened to a little bit of the podcast this morning, so I thought with these people that wrote this book, I haven't gotten too far into the book, but before I bring up anything from that, if anybody has anything to say. This is kind of a motley collection of notes. I just wrote down a few words here and there. There was a word they used called pristine attention. Pristine attention, talking about that that experience of silence, which, we would call it the experience of connection, of interdependence, and of impermanence that happens when we sit quietly. And, I've been thinking a lot and talking a lot about bodhicitta, and that it is, on the one hand, the way seeking mind, that which takes us to a spiritual practice or causes us to let go in such a way that we experience life in a bigger way and want to kind of keep that experience alive. And then once we enter into some kind of spiritual practice, finding ways within that practice which keep awakening that bodhicitta. That bodhi means awakened, and citta means mind. So that mind, which is really constantly seeking the way, constantly, which is, Tao. I once heard Shohaku give a talk in which he was describing the word Tao or Do in Japanese. And it was a non-description, you can't describe the way because it isn't a way. And so it's not that defined, so to constantly awaken to the present moment really is the way. And that means we have to let go of the last moment. We have to let go of our perception of what the next moment will be, and find some way to just be present. And for me, somebody asked me one time after I gave her, she came to Zen Center of Asheville, and I gave her some Zazen instruction, and she asked me, so what should I do? And I said, well, just show up, just come and sit. And 2 weeks later, she called, and she was going to do it, and she hadn't shown up, but she called me and she said, I'm sure that that's a really good way, but I need to do it faster. Can you give me another way? And I said, listen, if there was another way, if there was an easier way, I would be doing it. It's not an easy practice. It's a practice that we constantly have to be going back to. And the thing that this point that they keep making, these people that, at least on the podcast, like I say, I haven't gotten that far into the book, is that what brought them to this exploration was that they felt very despondent about the state of the world. And they asked the question, how are we going to navigate this? And they felt like the way to navigate it was by quieting the noise. And one of the things they brought up, and I have it listed here right after pristine attention, was the idea of prison noise. And I wasn't listening closely, so I don't remember exactly what they said, but it made me remember when I visited a couple prisons. One was in Indiana, and I was there for like 3 hours. It was a long time ago, and I remember how noisy it was. And because we were sitting there meditating, and it was a really solid group of guys. They'd meditated together, but just noise above, noise below, and also out where I visit out at AMCI out here in Spruce Pine. They come to the chapel and they say, I heard them say one time, the thing we look forward to the most is having just some time where it's not quite as noisy. It's not in such a noisy place because our lives are just filled with so much noise. But I think we're all kind of in that situation. I think, as I think about the effects of the quarantine, for me, I kept really appreciating the silence, and at the same time, feeling kind of the energy of restlessness and agitation that existed for so many people who are not used to sinking into that silence. And I think it just kind of permeated our energy fields, and so that we all have felt it. But for me, what it emphasized very much was how much we can affect the energy around us and how much we do affect the energy around us. And I talk about this all the time in terms of like Katagiri Roshi, and you talk about presence, you know, I mean, that's what attracted me to Katagiri Roshi as a teacher, was a certain presence that he had. And the presence really was just elicited by his deep effort to just be present in that place of stillness within what can be a very noisy environment. As I thought about the environment, the atmosphere in the Zendo that morning at the end of the sesshin, as I was thinking about it, I thought there was a lot of agitation in that room. I felt like these people who had left and gone downstairs and taken a nap, I felt like they really missed out on something, because you know, that bucking bronco was kind of, it kind of shook all of the agitation out of me or something. I literally was moving every few seconds. And I thought, well, you know, it's not bothering anybody because nobody else is here. And I just let myself move and kept shifting my position. But I was just determined to stay there on that cushion. And I think when we have experiences like that, you know, I'm hearing this more and more, not just from other Buddhists, but sometimes when I'm scanning on the, I'm driving along and scanning on the radio, I hear these Christian preachers, and everyone is talking about how joy can be awakened through our difficulties if we just allow it to be. You know, and I feel that same way about silence. You know, Katagiri Roshi's message that came through in the first book of his, you know, his lectures that was put out, it was called Returning to Silence. And I think of that so often about how, and you know, my name means silence. I always joke because I say, because I'm such a quiet person. I thought it was a joke, you know, when I got the name. It means right silence. And but what I've discovered, you know, and I didn't want Katagiri Roshi to tell me too much about my name. I wanted to kind of figure it out for myself, you know, because he thought it was a great name. He came up to me right after I, you know, received it in Jukai, and he said, "Do you like your name?" And I was like, yeah, I think so. But I had, until then, I had thought he was kind of joking with me because I was the one person in the Zendo who really got a lot of flack for not being able to sit still all the time. People were teasing me about that, and it bothered them. And Judith Regier, some of you may know Judith, she even claims that she used to sit still until she started sitting next to me at sessions. So it was that bad. But what I have discovered is that, you know, we all have that, we all have that quiet presence, but we, you know, our minds tell us we have to do something more. And so it's like Pigpen, you know, he has all this dirt around him, but he's a really quiet little guy, you know. But there's so much commotion in the world, and I guess that if we engage too much, we can get kind of caught up in that commotion. At least us extroverts have that difficulty. So being able to recognize that silence within, you know, I think I'm so happy for Christmas because this is the time of year. I mean, even in the days when I used to be running around doing things right up till the last minute before our family gatherings, and when our family got together, we just stopped. We went to church, and then we came home and opened presents, you know. But how fortunate to have a time to stop. But then it's cold out there, and I was thinking this morning about all the creatures who are really cold, and I want to let them all in. Something was trying to get in this morning, and Stella was telling it no. I don't know what it was. Something was scratching. So anyway, that's a few points. Oh, yeah. One of the things I wrote down that they said is the problems we're facing personally or globally might not be solved by thinking or talking. I found it interesting. These two people are scholars, or something. They're quite they've achieved a lot in their life. And so their way of talking about this experience is to use a lot of words, but and then they were talking about silence as the ability to perceive a signal, the law of the land, intuition. So they were talking about what happens within this silence, and it's really tapping our intuition. Again, to me, this just goes back to that experience of letting go. And it's not really something we can make happen, but with enough experience of just sitting down and shutting up, of just experiencing that silence again and again, we at least have a sense of how to step back a little bit from it. And this is what Dogen is pointing to, I think, with Shikantaza, or just sitting. If we can, anytime we sit down and shut up, we are kind of taking a step back and disengaging just a bit, because it almost is counterintuitive to sit down and shut up. We have this kind of momentum. And, also there's the dukkha, where we think we can get something that will give us a sense of not that things aren't impermanent, that, that life isn't out of our control, that somehow we have control. Excuse me, my nose is running, but I can't find any Kleenex around here. And then one of the things they said, silence is there, we just have to remember. Silence is the language of God, and all else is a poor translation. That was a quote from Rumi. Silence is the language of God, and all else is a poor translation. And I think I wrote this down, that silence is scary. We really, when we're silent, we feel what we feel, and we see what we hear, what we hear, we see what we see. We think what we see, what we think. And it can be very scary. And some people have told me at times at silent retreats that silence has been used towards them as a way of shutting them out. And yeah, I mean, we've all experienced that, and we all maybe have done that. And that makes it scary too. I think there's also that kind of reaction that comes up. They were talking about connecting with children in silence. And there was they quoted this 5-year-old who when, I don't know exactly what the context was, but it was something that caused her to get upset and say they were scaring the fairies away. And what do the fairies represent? The kids here were talking about, they were building at one point, they were building fairy houses to attract the fairies here at Great Tree. Oh yeah, and then they talked about it, and this was my experience too. People described deep silence, because what they've done in their research is they've gone around and they've interviewed all these different kinds of people in all these different kinds of professions. And so they were talking about some of the things that people reported, and they said people describe deep silence coming from apparently noisy situations. And I think, I really think on some level that for many people that the silence that the quarantine brought about really really affected a lot of people in a very deep way. And then what they're talking about is silence as an effective way to find solutions. And I sure have found that true with Zazen. I told you about, I had to give that talk out in LA to all these people at this big precept ceremony, all these 100 people who were receiving the precepts from all these different temples in the country, and then these 80 teachers, 80 Zen teachers who were kind of orchestrating the whole thing. And so I was very nervous, and I had some serious meltdowns around it, and what I found myself realizing is that I needed to go and sit because I just I couldn't keep all that energy that was coming up. I couldn't pull it all together. And I thought, what am I going to do? I can't sit up. I can't get up there and, engage in that. And so what I found myself doing is just, and it was a perfect situation, because everybody there came to this practice because of Zazen. And so all I had to do was say to my group, not going to be here for a few hours. I'm going to the Zendo if you need me, And, they went on without me. And, but to have that, available, and it's available to all of us all the time, but to know that that's available, and to know that that's an important thing when we feel that agitation. We really want to grasp onto something, but there's nothing, of course, to grasp onto. And so Zazen really helps us to recognize that. It helps us to just let go into the spaciousness of life, and as some people say, let go and let God. But Kadagiri Roshi said, we live by our effort, but not only by our effort, we are supported by all beings. And every time that I think, recognize all beings, it's like, oh, I don't have to do this by myself. So I've got some more notes, but I'm just going to stop there because maybe you have something you want to share.
I appreciate your bringing up the deep silence of the quarantine. I found that to be so true. Like in the early days of the quarantine, like the silence out in the world when there wasn't much traffic, there weren't many people walking around. And there was something so beautiful about it. And then later on, even as people started to move about and be out in the world, I would find in my tiny little garden with the birds and the insects and the plants, it is perhaps the deepest silence I've ever experienced. Like I felt like I could even, I don't know, I felt a connection to the earthworms and the compost, just like we were all in it together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I appreciate this chance to remember that and re-enter that.
Thank you. My nephews, some of you have heard me talk about this, maybe my nephews when they were young, now they're 20 and 22, but when they were quite young, somehow their parents ended up asking them what they thought their punishment should be. And they came up with something called the simple life. And it meant no technology at all. And my nephew, Henry, got caught doing something on the internet that he wasn't supposed to be doing. And so my brother asked him what he thought his punishment should be, and he said the simple life. And he said, for how long? And he came up with a week. And he kept it, I mean, he came up with the punishment, so he did it. But at the end of the week, he was telling my brother, well, actually throughout the week, he was telling my brother about this ant colony that he was watching. And he got really engaged in watching these ants and their whole process of how they work together and everything like that. He was watching them every day. And he said at the end, he said, yeah, it's so good to do that once in a while, because I would have never stopped and watched those ants. That reminded me when you were talking about the earthworms. Another thing that they said that I thought that was interesting, I didn't know this, but they said that Gandhi spent every Monday in silence.
Mm.
That's a thought. That would mean turn off all your devices, right? And then you have to make it all up the next day. Well, if no one else has anything they want to contribute, this is your last chance.
I just want to say thank you. And who would have thought such good conversation would come out of silence? But then, of course. So thank you, all of you.
Thank you.
Teijo.
Thank you.
Well, have a happy Christmas Eve, everyone. Oh,
Yeah.
Brooke gave us a show. Thank you, Brooke. May the merit of this practice
Merit of the practice.
benefit all beings. Someone,
All beings,
and bring peace.
and bring peace.
Have a peaceful Christmas Eve.
Yeah. I thank you.